Verdi, Nevada officially became a town in 1868, although its story actually starts 1 year earlier and 1 mile west in a very different town called Crystal Peak. The bustling town of Crystal Peak had been the headquarters of the Central Pacific Railroad for a couple years now, and hopes were high that they'd be getting the sought-after new train station. But unbeknownst to the citizens of Crystal Peak, the Big Four of the Central Pacific had other plans. In a land grab scheme, they secretly started looking 1 mile east on an unoccupied stretch of land near the Truckee River. In the beginning of 1868, about 2 weeks before the tracks were to be completed to the aforementioned town, the Central Pacific made the announcement that ultimately doomed the busy Crystal Peak. Now, our story doesn't just start with the bitter end of one town who found themselves on the wrong side of the river. It begins the town of Bridgeport. So right about now, we're all thinking, Harmony, this is a movie about Verdi, but you just said Bridgeport. Bridgeport was the name chosen for the brand new railroad town. The only problem? There had been a long-standing state line dispute, and worried that two Bridgeport, Californias might be a little confusing. So they settled this problem the way all major problems are solved, by drawing a name out of a hat, of course. The names of several opera singers were placed into a hat. Charles Crocker, received the dubious honors and pulled the name of Giuseppe Verdi. And just like that, Verdi was born. This new town was so much more than just a new train station. It was full of hope, promise, and industry, with not one but two swanky hotels, multiple saloons, stores, stage shop, and this town was also chock full of lumber. By July of 1868, there were 4 sawmills, and within a year, 6 sawmills, all capable of providing 1,000 feet of lumber per hour. It became a serious mill town and terminal for the Central Pacific. Yes, Verdi was on the map, which also made it on the mark. November 1870, when what would be called the boldest robbery of the West, when 5 men, led by Sunday school superintendent John Chapman, boarded the Central Pacific Overland Express number 1 right outside of Verdi, Nevada. Made their way off with $41,600 in gold coin. Who were these daring men, you ask? Well, Smiling Jack Davis, who was a big to-do and seemingly legitimate businessman from Virginia City. Tilton Cockerell, a seasoned criminal who already had a conviction for armed robbery under his belt. Sol Jones, a down-and-out miner who had never dabbled in crime before. James Gilchrist, a former carpenter and criminal novice. E.B. Parsons, who had a considerable rap sheet. The very well-known stagecoach robber, John Squires, who was a career criminal with a considerable rap sheet. And John Chapman, the Sunday school superintendent and supposed leader of the gang. Okay, guys, it went down like this. Just after midnight, 3 masked men boarded the express car, and 2 more immediately came to their aid from the rear cars, at which point they proceeded to detach it. Engine and express car separated from the train and flying down the track. A few miles down the way, they stopped the express car and opened up the boxes and hopped off somewhere near where Mayberry Park sits today and made off with $41,600 in gold coin. Prior to the daring heist, they had cut the telegraph lines and greased the tracks. Word of the robbery finally reached the sheriff at Washoe City around 8 a.m. From there, word traveled fast. Large rewards were offered by Washoe County, the state of Nevada, Central Pacific Railroad, and Wells Fargo Express Company totaling $30,000, which is just a mere $700,000 by today's standards, and nothing will get people searching for something like $700,000 will. First one to be caught was Gilchrist, and he wasted no time singing like a canary and turning everybody in, which led to the quick apprehension of Parsons, the much sought-after John Squires. They caught up with Cockerell and Jones in Reno, Roberts in Long Valley. Jack Davis, a respectable businessman from Virginia City, was arrested in his hometown. The ringleader, John Chapman, and was promptly arrested. With all the men caught, all of the money except for $7,000 was recovered. Now, you would think this would be the end of this story, but to make this a true Wild West story, about a year into their prison sentence, Cockerell, Chapman, Parsons, and Squires all managed to break out during a riot. They were all quickly recaptured at a place called Convict Lake, except for E.B. Parsons, who remained on the run for 5 years before being recaptured. The excitement of the 1870s might have started off with a bang, but good things were actually happening for the town of Verdi. The status of the up-and-coming town was never more apparent than in 1871, when none other than President Grant made Verdi his last stop on his California tour. Business was on the rise, and the lumber industries were at an all-time high. Not everybody was happy with Verdi's newfound success, which became more apparent in the early 1880s when a string of arson fires that would plague Verdi for the next 20 years began. It had also become clear that all these fires were towards the same company, Lonke's Lumber Mill. Now, why would someone want to keep burning Lonke's Lumber Mill over and over again? Well, it seems that Oliver Lonke had the audacity, the gall, the moral rectitude to hire Chinese workers. That's right, he hired the Chinese. And it seems that the good old townspeople of Truckee and the Anti-Chinese League weren't too happy about it either, which became very clear with their cease and desist letters ordering Lonke to fire his Chinese at once, and the multiple warnings that they printed in the newspaper. They would not be responsible for what would happen to him if he continued his employment of the Chinese. Oh, and then there was the many arson fires that were set to his Verdi lumber mill. After each subsequent fire, he did not only not let his Chinese workers go, he would hire more Chinese workers, which had him labeled an enemy to the whites. It all came to a head in 1888, when all of Lonke's lumber mills were simultaneously lit on fire. And just to make sure that none of them could be put out, all of the fire hoses in town had been slashed. Chinese workers or not, fire continued to be a huge problem for the town of Verdi.
Fire is the one word that strikes terror to the heart of the most daring lumberjack. Now timber toppers become smoke eaters as they struggle desperately to control a blaze that can eat up hillsides, mountains, millions of acres of irreplaceable virgin lumber. A shift of the wind can trap these men, but fearlessly they battle the red enemy till the fire lies in smoldering defeat.
With several devastating fires that would almost completely wipe out the town multiple times. After each of the devastating fires, the towns and the mills were always rebuilt. But after the last fire, it was obvious that there was not much future left for the lumber industry in the area. There really weren't many trees left, and the few trees that were left weren't worth harvesting at the risk of the fires continuing on. And just like the empty buildings of Crystal Peak before it stood as a testament to times past, the grand mill in town stood there over the old mill pond, empty, a shell of what once was the glory of the Verdi lumber industry. The townspeople of Verdi have always been a proud and tenacious bunch. They don't let small things like devastating fires or deforestation stop them. They just keep rebuilding. If you journey to Verdi today, you find a charming town nestled in the picturesque Sierra Nevada mountains.
We're here in Verdi, Nevada.
Verdi has been able to maintain its historic charm with many buildings dating back to the mining days of the 1800s. When you visit Verdi, you'll feel like you've stepped back in time to a simpler era. With friendly locals, historic buildings, and a close-knit community, Verdi is the perfect place to escape the hustle and bustle of modern life and enjoy a peaceful, small-town existence.
Verdi is the town that came after Crystal Peak. So Crystal Peak was 1 mile, a mile and a half up the road over here over the Crystal Peak Bridge.
At the end of the rainbow, there's happiness.
Central Pacific actually made the town of Verdi.
How often I cried, but my life is a race, just a wild goose chase, and my dreams have all been denied.
One of the portions of the 4 is still out there. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go search for that money. We're going to use old maps. We're going to use what we know about the area, and we're going to find out where that money is, and we're going to become rich. Let's go together.
Let's go get that money.
Let's go get that money.